Alright, I am back with another video, and welcome back to our spooky Halloween-themed build month, in which I make builds based on classic monsters from horror fiction, and today we're doing one of the most classic of them all, the werewolf. Which was really bloody hard to do. I will say that this build has gone through multiple iterations. Originally I went at it from like more of a vanilla build making kind of thing, and I ended up with something that kind of ended up being like a monster hunter mixed with a werewolf, you know, the irony of you are the very thing that you swore to kill, which was going to be like a druid nature cleric mix and had all this stuff going on, and that is a cool build. That is going to be another build down the road, but it didn't really capture the essence of the werewolf in the way that I wanted it to. And I mean, I don't really need to explain it, but you guys all know what a werewolf is. An uncontrolled animalistic transformation that happens under a full moon. Now, obviously, there have been many different ways of kind of going about werewolf transformations as time has gone on, different restrictions, different kind of causes, whether or not the person is able to do it at will. Especially in D&D itself, there are a few ways to kind of go about making a werewolf character. But in D&D and BG3, it is actually hard to become a werewolf, like literally. As well, when you actually build it from a player character perspective, it is a bit overpowered, as werewolves do come with a lot of things, like, you know, damage resistances. You know, silver weapons are really the only things that can affect them. Some of them have natural healing. I mean, all through fiction and such like that, werewolves are depicted as these incredibly tough and hard to kill, uncontrolled monsters. And I thought it would be kind of fun to try and capture this in a build by making something, you know, that's extremely tanky, has the ability to transform into a wolf. But then as I kind of got into that last build that I was talking about, it didn't really fit the vibe. It wasn't until I started experimenting with some of the new stuff, especially the stuff that's come from mods, I should say, especially the stuff that's come from the new Mistress Spells mod, which adds a bunch of Tasha's stuff and some Unearthed Arcana stuff and such like that, that I really got more to the point of a build that I was happy with. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're seeing the druid levels and you're thinking, oh my god, it's just another high-level moon druid werewolf wild shape. And honestly, yes, you are correct. This is going to be mostly moon druid. However, the additional spells that we're going to get and some other features that I'll be explaining later are absolutely going to change the feel of this build and how it works. You're going to be playing this extremely differently than how you would normally play a wild shape based character. Because let's be honest, without a mod that gives us like the werewolf transformation, which I know exists on Nexus, but doesn't exist on Mod Manager, especially not for consoles yet, there's not really a way to become a proper werewolf. So I kind of have to go for this kind of vibe of uncontrolled animalistic urges and like maybe sort of like minor transformations, so like you're going to get things like teeth and like the fangs and the claws and such, but not straight up being able to transform into a werewolf, but then later on being able to transform into a full wolf, which is, I guess, some depictions of werewolves have them more being like actual wolves rather than like a man-wolf hybrid. Again, it kind of depends on where you pull your lore from, so you know, we're just going to have to work with what we have here. I knew I wanted to do this build, especially when I thought of, you know, Shadowheart being a werewolf, you know, her fear of wolves, her connection to her Selûnite heritage, you know, being about, like, wolves and wild shape and all that, you know, her dad and all that. So I felt like it made sense to make Shadowheart the werewolf, and I kind of changed her into this, like, kind of, like, you know, unkempt, you know, outlander survival type person. You know, we kind of got the, you know, the messy hair and, like, the kind of camouflage war paint thing going on here. You know, just something to make her look a little bit more outlanderish, like I said. But yeah, no, I think this build, the way it's turned out, is actually really, really fun. It's kind of going to be a mod showcase for the Mistress Spells mod, but I do think by the time that we're done, you will agree that this build actually does work out quite well and is quite a fun twist on the usual druid playstyle. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Starting things off, we're going to be a half-elf, because Shadowheart is a half-elf, but this is going to get us some things that we do appreciate, namely civil militia, allowing us to use spears, pikes, and halberds and glaives, and as well as getting armor proficiency with light armor and shields. As a druid, we're already going to get the armor proficiencies, but the weapon proficiencies are actually quite nice to have, so keep that in mind if you decide you want to use them. We also do gain dark vision. I mean, it makes sense for a werewolf to have dark vision, and we're also going to get Fey ancestry, meaning that we have advantage on saving throws against being charmed, and magic cannot put us to sleep. I actually think this fits a werewolf kind of build perfectly. Again, one of the big things about kind of werewolf stories is the ability to calm down and reach the human within, aka aka charming the werewolf in question, which we're going to be kind of saving against to stop that from happening, again creating that kind of narrative. And magic can't put us to sleep. We're not going to be sleeping on a full moon. Again, I just think this makes perfect sense for this build. I probably would have gone elf or half elf anyway, even if we weren't using Shadowheart, which for this build we are. Shadowheart is a high half elf, which means you get to choose a high elf cantrip. And again, thanks to the Mistress Spells mod, we do actually have a lot more options than normal. I kind of stuck with Friends because I don't really think a lot of these spells make sense, especially since they do use our intelligence for the casting modifier, which, as you can see, I've dumped. But there are a few interesting options here that I will be exploring in the future. Otherwise, I just like to take Friends because it is an overall useful spell, but otherwise there are other options here if you feel like you would like them. We are going to be kicking things off as a Druid because I want to get certain Druid spells as early as possible. Druid is going to give us a few things. Obviously, we're going to get spell casting and all that, so let's talk about the cantrips. First up, you get to choose 2 cantrips from the Druid spell list, and I have gone with these 2. Guidance, because it is an overall very useful spell, and I do like to think if Shadowheart kind of went down this path of maybe what this build is Shadowheart, when she went out into her excursion into the woods for her Saloonite kind of rite of passage, she never came out and became this like wild shaping werewolf type character because she got lost in the woods. Like, she was never found by the Sharan cloister. Like, I think that could actually be really interesting. Like, she just went into the woods and was never found again until she suddenly re-emerged later when the Nautiloid stuff happened. If you kind of wanted to make this like a what if build in addition to the Halloween build. But I do think that base Saloonite heritage would come out, so she would have some of Saluna's blessings, so I think guidance does make sense here. We also are going to get Magic Stone, a new cantrip added to the Druid spell list, again thanks to Mistra. So this is going to allow us to transmute magical stones that deal 4 to 9 bludgeoning damage and use our spellcasting ability for the attack rolls. Basically, we never really learned how to fight properly, so we are kind of just going to be chucking rocks at people. I think this is just a fun spell to have, but feel free to swap it out for anything else that you would like. But I don't think we need things like Shillelagh or anything like that, because again, the way this build is going to work out. So, I mean, we're going to throw rocks at people. That sounds kind of fun. Next up for our ability scores, this is going to look pretty damn strange. Obviously, we have 2 odd ability scores here and quite a lot of 8s. Unfortunately, in order to kind of optimize the stats in a way that makes this build a bit more viable, I did need to do a bit of finagling here. So strength is at 8 because we're not going to need it. Dexterity is at 16. This is going to be mainly for our armor class, as well as some other things I'll get into later. We're also going to have constitution at 15. We are going to be bumping this up with a half feat later. Intelligence is at 8. I mean, again, this is a Shadowheart that hasn't had really any formal education, has been in the woods most of her life. I do think intelligence would be rather low. Again, I would like this higher because intelligence saving throws can be really nasty, but hey, what can you do? Wisdom is at 17. This is going to get bumped up later as well with an item. You probably already know which one it is. And charisma is at 8 because again, it's not really something we need. And between friends and some other stuff we're going to be getting in a minute, we can make charisma checks if we need to, but honestly, I don't think we need to. Next up for our skill proficiencies, Shadowheart is an acolyte, so she's going to have religion and insight. Insight I care a bit more about than religion here, but hey, we can't change it, so we work with what we have. And we're going to take nature and animal handling. In fact, actually no, I'm going to swap nature out for survival. We're going to have animal handling and survival. Now you may think, why on earth are we taking animal handling? We can just take speak with animals as a druid and make this completely invalid. Not true. We have an 8 in charisma, and if we use speak with animals, we're going to be using our charisma for our persuasion, intimidation, and all that when speaking with animals, whereas if we have animal handling, we're going to be using our wisdom, which makes a lot more sense. And I kind of like the idea of this character kind of being slightly more animalistic and not having as much general speech anyway, so I think just having animal handling makes more sense than just being able to directly speak with animals anyway. So overall, I do think this makes a bit more sense in the long run. So let's move on. Next up at Druid level 2, we get to choose our subclass, and yes, we are going with Circle of the Moon. Now, I don't think this is 100% necessary, however, I do think it fits more into the werewolf thing. It is literally the Circle of the Moon. I mean, give me a break here, but it's also going to give us access to Lunar Mend. The power of the full moon is going to envelop us and make us harder to kill, allowing us to use our bonus action to expend spell slots to make it so that we heal a bit easier. Or we could just heal in general. It allows us to expend spell slots to heal. My brain is all over the place today, again. Life has been a bit hectic for me lately, and I'm lucky I'm getting this video out at all. But anyways, Lunar Mend is just going to be great for making us tanky. Again, I really wanted the idea of this character being relatively hard to kill. Again, that kind of werewolf vibe. So Lunar Mend is really going to help us with that when we are wild shaped. And right away at level 2 of Druid, we are going to get the Wolf Wild Shape, which is going to give us the ability to do a few things. It's going to give us pack tactics. We can distract enemies, making it so our allies have a higher chance to hit them, again with pack tactics as well. And there's also a few other things like exposing bite, which can guarantee critical hits. We'll get that at later levels. There's just a lot of things that the Wolf Wild Shape can do. It is often overshadowed by things like the bear or the owl bear or the panther or even the myrmidons at higher levels of Moon Druid, but the wolf does have a lot to bring to the table, and I do think that this build does work really well as a support character, and I think that is mainly what you're going to want to focus on. This build works best in a team, which again is kind of contradictory to the whole like they've been alone in the wilderness for the whole time thing. But again, if they suddenly join the plot of Baldur's Gate 3 in this way, then you can kind of see where that might change. They might learn to work with others and see that working in a pack works a bit better than being a lone wolf. See what I did there? So overall, I do think this build works well with others. I did do my testing in solo, and I do find that this build is powerful. It's just very tanky. I think it's more tanky than it is like a DPS character, so you are going to want to pair this with other party members that can output high damage to get the best out of this build. But anyway, I'll get more into that a bit later. What I'm basically trying to say here is the Wild Shape Wolf is amazing, but it's great, it's just way better if you use it in conjunction with other party members. Next up, we do get to prepare some spells. We were able to do this at level 1, but I forgot to. So, let's have a look at what we have available to us. Again, we have more options thanks to Mistra. We are going to want to take some general buffing spells, and I do want some things that are going to buff our kind of like physical attributes. So I want Enhanced Leap and Long Strider, making us faster and leap further. Again, we are a werewolf. We have better physical abilities than most. And then the rest, it's kind of up to you. Again, if this character is a wilderness survivor, I do think they're going to want access to things that will allow them to survive in the wilderness. And if they are harnessing this magical ability, I think that's what they would want to focus on. So we're going to pick up Goodberry and Create or Destroy Water. Goodberry is a consistent source of food, even though we do prefer meat. This will help in a pinch, as well as Create or Destroy Water, allowing us to create water for us to drink. I mean, that's just kind of it, isn't it? Nothing too crazy. And then finally, for your last spell, it's entirely up to you what you want to grab. If I originally kind of went with Nature Cleric, like I said, for the level 6 ability to dampen elements, allowing you to take half damage from elemental attacks. So something like Absorb Elements would be actually quite fitting here. Again, if you are kind of like this kind of druidic character where nature is kind of emboldening you, then being able to absorb the elements could work quite nicely. You could deal an additional 1d6 damage of the element type that you take damage from on your next attack, and you cast this as a reaction, and you also take half damage from that attack. So I think this could work out quite nicely, but there are other things you could take if you feel like it doesn't really fit the vibe. To be honest, I could see you taking something like Healing Word, getting a bit of that healing factor early on. This gives you basically Lunar Mend without having to wild shape, because again, a lot of the time with this build, you're actually not going to be wild shaped, but that will come in a bit later. So it's entirely up to you what you want to pick here. I think I'll stick with Healing Word just for that little bit of healing, but it's entirely up to you. Next up at Druid level 3, we're going to get access to level 2 spells, and this is where things start to kick into overdrive. You're going to want to pick up 2 spells from this level. Number 1 is Bestial Growth. Bestial Growth is going to allow you to grow hoof, spikes, or claws from your body that allow unarmed strikes to count as magical for the purpose of overcoming resistance and immunity to non-magical damage. So here we are, here is our werewolf claws, but you may be thinking, okay, we don't use unarmed strikes, what's the point? Well, let's get into that now. It also grants a 1d4 bonus to attack rolls, a 1+1 bonus to attack rolls, and an extra 1d6 plus 1 bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage depending on what you take. This does cost our concentration, but it does work until our next long rest. So we can just cast this and then keep it up. Believe it or not, from my testing, this affects certain wild shapes, but it also does just affect our regular unarmed strikes. So our partial werewolf transformation comes out with this spell. Obviously, we're going to be choosing the claws option for this to be able to turn our unarmed strikes into slashing damage. And I think being able to change the damage type of our unarmed strikes is actually kind of cool, but obviously this is one of the most on-theme werewolf spells we can grab. Yes, it being concentration does suck, but hey, it's better than nothing. Next up, we have Summon Beast. This is going to allow us to call forth the spirit of a beast to assist us. It can be a frog, a raven, or a wolf. And yes, this wolf also has pack tactics, and of course if we have this wolf out, we get pack tactics from our wild shape or from the wolf, so we get advantage on our attack rolls. Unfortunately, this doesn't scale as well as something like the Beastmaster Ranger's Companion, and I would say is only really decent at the low to mid level of the game. Once you kind of get into Act 3, even upcasting the spell with high level spell slots like 5 or 6, it doesn't really have enough HP to survive. However, in the early game, I'd say this is absolutely brilliant. Maybe you do have one kind of wolf companion that you have from the wilderness and you can summon it to kind of help you out. I do think this is worth bringing in the early game, but you probably will train this out a bit later on, but it's too on theme not to include here. Next up, at Druid level 4, you gain access to a couple more wild shapes, but who cares, we're a wolf. You also gain access to another cantrips, and it's entirely up to you what you want to pick here. I could suggest going with Primal Savagery, allowing you to strike a target with corrosive claws, which will deal 1d10 acid damage. So it just allows us to basically kind of use our werewolf claw kind of flavoring here to do an alternate type of damage if we need to do something other than physical. So I feel like it does make sense. The spell can also be cast while we're silenced, which is great because this is just our kind of innate spell casting. So it does make sense. Or not innate spell casting, it's part of our body. And then for another level 2 spell we can pick up at this level, I suggest Moonbeam. Again, that kind of Selûnite kind of heritage coming through here. Moonbeam is going to allow us to cool down a moonbeam, I guess, that deals 2d10 radiant damage, and you can choose to move it as an action. This does cost our concentration, so you can't have this and bestial form up at the same time, but if you feel like you really need a ranged attack instead of a melee attack, then this is a decent option. It's mainly here for lore and flavor reasons, but you can train it, you can kind of swap things out if you so choose. Next up for our feat, we are going to take a proper feat at this level, because our wisdom will be at 17, but that's more than good enough for the early to mid game, and dexterity is at 16, but it will be bumped up to an 18 thanks to our piece of equipment that we have here. So we are going to be taking a feat here, and we're going to be taking Resilient Constitution. This is going to give us a +1 to our Constitution, allowing us to gain a bit more HP, as well as being able to make it so that we are proficient in Constitution saving throws, which will allow us to have a better concentration save on our spells, which obviously we want. Now that we kind of have the basic kind of kit for this build, I do want to take a quick 1-level multi-class dip into Monk. Monk is just going to give us a bunch of stuff that we want. We're going to gain unarmored defense, which is going to be super important for this build. So probably up until now, you probably want to be wearing light or medium armor, but now we can go straight into unarmored defense. We also gain the ability to use dexterity instead of strength for weapons that aren't two-handed, which that will help us out later, as well as being able to have a little bit more damage on our base unarmed strikes. They will now use our dexterity and deal 1d4 bludgeoning damage as a base. And then we also have the ability to now attack as a bonus action after making an unarmed strike. So we essentially get extra attack, which at total level 5 makes sense. You can basically take this 1-level dip of Monk pretty much right after you get bestial form. Otherwise, you can take it after you get your first feat as well, which I'm doing here. So yeah, overall, I think this is going to work quite well for us. We do also gain Flurry of Blows, but we're only going to have 2 key points to use it with, so you're only going to be able to do it twice per short rest, but still, that's pretty damn good. If you just need to do one big burst round of Nova damage, then you absolutely can, because trust me, even with only 1 level of Monk in this build, this is still going to be able to do a lot of damage by the time we're done. You'll see what I mean a bit later. Now, back to Druid. At this point, we're going to be able to get Wild Strike, allowing us to make an additional attack after making an unarmed strike while in wild shape. So now we have extra attack while we're wild shaped. But we also gain access to level 3 spells. And I do need to redo my whole spell list because of the way the multi-classing spell menu works in this game. It's a bit of a pain in the butt. Let's just see here. Now we'll get rid of you and put you and you back on as well as you. Perfect. So we do get a level 3 spell at this point, but honestly it's kind of hard to tell if any of these really fit the build. I mean, you do gain access to things like Venomous Barbs, allowing you to make it so a friendly animal's melee attacks deal an additional 1d4 piercing damage and can poison enemies for 1d4 poison damage, but this does cost our concentration and the creature must have an intelligence of 3 or less, so I honestly don't think it's going to come up that much. There's things like Erupting Earth and there's some water spells here. The Geomancer and the Hydromancer are definitely future builds, but honestly I think we're just going to kind of stick with our level 2 to 1 options. Pick up whatever you like. At Druid level 6, we're going to gain our Moon Druid feature Primal Strike. Now our Wild Shape attacks can overcome resistance and immunity to non-magical damage. This is pretty important, especially as you start to get into the mid and the late game where enemies do resist non-magical damage more and more, so I do think this is worth picking up, and only Moon Druids get this. Yes, you could play a Land Druid if you want more spellcasting, but I do think Moon Druid makes more sense for this build, as I've already justified. We do gain access to the Panther and Owlbear forms, so if you really do feel like Wolf is not working out for you, use Owlbear because it's pretty much the best one. And you also do gain another spell at this level, but it is really hard to choose something, I would say. I did go for protection from poison for like a lore reason type thing, because again, we're this outlander survival character, eating pretty much whatever we get, raw meat, you know, various different weird berries and shit that aren't good berry, so perhaps having an innate poison resistance, which we can get from the spell, would make sense. At Druid level 7, we're going to gain access to level 4 spells, and this is where we're going to get another important spell for the build, because I do think this character has a bit of a character arc. I would say we're getting to around the midpoint of Act 2 here, where I think this character would start to kind of, like, the rest of the party would start to rub off on them, and they would kind of start to regain some more human traits. Maybe, in fact, actually picking up a weapon instead of just rushing in and scratching with their werewolf attacks, and actually starting to be a bit more of a, you know, focused fighter. Don't get me wrong, they're basically a discount barbarian still when it comes to how they actually fight in combat, but maybe they are starting to get a bit more of a mindset about them and are learning to channel that werewolf form a bit better. They're starting to get a bit more control over it. So I'm going to recommend the level 4 spell, Guardian of Nature. This allows you to call forth a nature spirit to transform you into a powerful guardian. This gives us yet another beast form. As a bonus action and for our concentration, we're able to imbue ourselves with a new type of power. We're going to get a primal beast form, which is going to do a bunch of stuff, like I'll go over them a bit later once I can actually show you the details, but the main thing is it's going to add an additional 1d6 of force damage to all of our weapon attacks. So when we eventually do decide to pick up a weapon, which again for lore and kind of story reasons, that could make sense throughout as you go throughout the game, then this will help with that. But again, we gain 2 forms that I'll go into a bit more detail about later. But yeah, as a level 4 spell, I think it's too thematic not to take, because it's another transformation. Anyways, at level 8, you do gain access to the Saber-Tooth Tiger transformation, if you want to use it, as well as the ability to prepare an extra spell, and looking at the level 4 spells here, I think Stone Skin is going to be a great option. While we're wild-shaped into the wolf form, we might want to concentrate on a different spell, and Stone Skin would be amazing for this build, because it makes it so we have resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, so we can get that werewolf weapon resistance, allowing us to basically make ourselves immune to the, not immune, very, very, very hard to kill, I would say. So this plus Wild Shape is going to be extremely powerful. Do note that the fact that we are going to be transforming into the wolf, they don't exactly have the highest constitution, so you may drop this if you're taking a lot of attacks, which in solo testing I did, but I was actually able to keep it up a bit longer than I thought, especially since resilience constitution does affect wild shape forms, so I got a bit more mileage out of it than I think most would in some cases in my testing. But again, if you're working as a team, you're going to be taking less hits, so this just makes the hits that you do take way less effective. So next up, as our feat or ability score improvement, you can kind of choose to take whatever you want here. Obviously, you could choose to bump up your dexterity if you so desire. Bumping up your dexterity would give you a total of 20 with the equipment that we have, making our unarmed strikes a bit more powerful. Our constitution could be bumped up to 18 for more HP and better saving throws overall. And again, you could bump up your wisdom. You would have a total of 19 by the time you reach Act 3 with the equipment that we have. So it's entirely up to you what you want to pick here, but there are a few other options. We already took resilient constitution, but Warcaster would be great if you really want to make it so you're pretty much never ever going to drop your concentration spells, since they are a bit of a cornerstone of the build. Savage Attacker could make a lot of sense. Lucky could also work, so you could reroll the saving throws if you need to. There's a ton of different ways you could kind of go about it if you so desire. I would say it's entirely up to you what you want to pick here. This is kind of basically a free level, but I do like taking that constitution because I do think that higher HP pool is definitely worth it. So yeah, that is level 8. At level 10 of Druid, we're going to gain access to a few, or level 9 of Druid, sorry, I should say, we're going to gain access to a few things. We're going to start getting level 5 spell slots, as well as access to 5th level spells. Now, overall, there isn't too much I would say that I immediately gravitate towards. The only thing I would like to grab is Mass Cure Wounds, just for a high-level healing spell, again fitting into that kind of healing factor that we have, but also being able to spread that love to our allies. That's kind of the only 5th level spell I would say is really worth taking on this build. Contagion could be like if you want to spread the curse of the werewolf, you could kind of flavor it as that if you like, but really this is kind of a throwaway slot to just put whatever you like in. A generic utility spell like Freedom of Movement could actually be really nice here, so maybe I would actually take that instead, but again, it's your choice. At Druid level 10, for real this time, we're going to gain access to a few things, mainly improved Wild Strike, so now we have 2 extra attacks while in Wild Shape. We've finally learned to fully channel our werewolf form and fully use its power, using its speed and agility to just absolutely tear into our enemies with animalistic brutality. We're also going to gain access to a few new wild shapes like the Dilophosaurus and the Myrmidon forms. We do also gain access to another cantrip at this point, and there's a couple of things you could go with. If you want to, you could take Create Bonfire, because again, you need heat to survive in the wilderness, so I feel like it makes sense for this character to have this spell. Or you can take Thunderclap for your werewolf howl, being able to actually do damage, and I kind of like that a bit more, so we're going to go with that. You also do get to choose another spell at this level, and I kind of made a case for Contagion, so I think I might take that. And finally, at Druid level 11, we gain access to level 6 spells, and there is one level 6 spell that I would like. That is Lesser Regeneration. The target continuously regains 10 hit points at the start of each turn unless it recently took acid or fire damage. Here is our full werewolf healing factor come online, a flat 10 hit points at the start of every turn. We're going to be combining this with some other things to gain a butt ton of healing on this build, and yes, you can cast this, then Wild Shape, and keep the regenerating factor, and it's not concentration based, so we can still concentrate on other spells while this is up. Again, I love this whole combination. I think it just makes the playstyle very different. You've got reasons to be in and out of Wild Shape, and your spell casting just augments your abilities in so many different ways. And that is the build. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this build is a very tanky character. You got a ton of HP on this build, in addition to the HP that you're going to have from Wild Shape, as well as the fact that you're going to be able to deal pretty damn decent damage in different ways. You can change the damage type that you're dealing, you'll be able to do big Nova attacks both inside and outside of Wild Shape, with things like our Flurry of Blows if you absolutely need to, as well as things like Bestial Growth to help you out with that as well. And then when you're in Wild Shape, you can just go absolutely crazy. So let's have a look at Bestial Growth real quick. Like I say, you can choose Hooves for bludgeoning, spines for piercing, or claws for slashing. I don't know how I forgot that. Anyways, and you can upcast it too. By casting this spell using a 4th or 5th level spell slot will increase the bonus by 2, and a 6th level spell slot will increase it by 3. So we're going to cast it with a 5th level spell slot, because I do want to save that 6th level slot for our healing factor. So we're going to go for a 5th level slot, which is what I used in testing. And here you go. We can look at our unarmed strikes, and you'll notice it didn't change our unarmed strikes from 1d4 to 1d6. No, it added 1d6 plus 2 to our unarmed strikes, meaning that our unarmed strikes are going to deal 1d4 plus 4, plus 1d6 plus 2, plus an extra d6 necrotic damage, which I'll get into in a minute. This means that even with a 1 level dip into Monk, our unarmed strikes are pretty damn powerful, and again, even though it costs our bonus action, we technically do have extra attack and Flurry of Blows here to be able to do pretty significant amounts of damage outside of Wild Shape. Is it full levels of Monk optimized? No, but it's still pretty fun, and I think there is definitely a level 3 Druid, level 9 Monk build in the future that takes full advantage of Bestial Form in this way, so I think there's something fun to do there. But otherwise, this is still a really fun combination, as well as I can quickly show off this as well, Guardian of Nature. Guardian of Nature's Primal Beast, which is probably what we're going to be using more, comes with the following benefits. Bestial Fur covers your body, and your facial features become more feral. Again, that's a werewolf transformation. Our movement speed will be increased by 3 meters. We gain dark vision for 18 meters, so a slight upgrade from our base. We make strength-based attack rolls with advantage, which unfortunately we're not going to be doing, but our melee weapon attacks will deal an extra 1 to 6 force damage. Again, this is just kind of a more controlled weapon-based version of our werewolf transformation. if you wanted to use it. The other option is the Giant Tree Guardian of Nature, which gives us 10 temporary hit points, advantage on Constitution saving throws, making Dexterity and Wisdom-based attack rolls with advantage, and the area within 5 meters of you is considered difficult terrain. Honestly, for this build, this might be the more powerful option. Unfortunately, this is concentration, so we can't use this and Bestial form at the same time, but you may find that advantage on con saves to be extremely valuable. And in fact, I would say this would work better if you're going to Wild Shape immediately after. So really, you just have a lot of different ways of augmenting yourself based on what you think is important. So yeah, that is kind of the basic kind of build strategy here. Just kind of pick the buff that you want and when you need it, and then just kind of use all of them together in the way that you feel is best. And again, you have a bunch of long-term buffing spells, long stride, freedom of movement, enhanced sleep, just all kind of protection from poison, and these will all kind of augment what you can do. And again, you have a lot of different damage type options, even up to acid damage, which could really be helpful against enemies who resist these certain things. And you even have the range damage option of Moonbeam that can be upcast up to level 6, which is really, really nice. So again, you do just have a lot of options here to do what you want to do. And with that, let's get into the equipment. So for this, it's going to be a bit strange because there's a lot of different ways you can go about this build. Unarmed strikes versus weapon attacks. You know, you have a lot of options here. The main thing is we are going to be wanting to keep unarmored defense, so that does limit our armor choices a bit, but otherwise we do have a pretty solid setup here, so let's get into it. I'll talk about your potential weapon options first. Obviously we are going to be using unarmed strikes or wild shape attacks probably most of the time. Otherwise, you do have these options. In the early game, I think the Shattered Flail will be very much on theme here. The Shattered Flail, as you can see, is literally just a bone. It's just a bone, which kind of makes sense. You just ripped out the bone from one of your kills that you've already eaten, and then are about to whack your enemies over the head with it. This also comes with a unique effect. It's an Act 1 weapon with a +2 weapon enchantment, which is great. And hitting an enemy with this weapon heals the wielder for 1 to 6 hit points, which again is that kind of healing factor, but they can go mad if they don't continue hitting an enemy each turn, literally losing your control over yourself. It's a werewolf weapon, it just is. You become hostile to everyone in the vicinity when you're mad, you lose control over the character. The only problem is that healing through this item doesn't trigger other passives that react to healing. So there may be a bit of anti-synergy here, but otherwise, I just absolutely love this. I think it works super well for kind of like the characterization of the early build. Again, we are going to be using unarmed strikes here, but if you decide that you do want to go with weapon attacks and you don't want to faff with all the unarmed strike stuff, you can take that level of monk out and just use this instead. Otherwise, I think either this or the unarmed strikes will work really, really well. But if you do decide to pick up a proper weapon in the late game, again, kind of leaning into that kind of character growth and that kind of learning experience, I actually kind of recommend the Staff of Spell Power, or pretty much any quarter staff that you can come up with. This is basically just a pretty standard staff that gives you a +1 bonus to your spell save DC and spell attack rolls, which isn't really relevant to this build. However, it will give you Arcane Battery, which will allow you to cast one spell of your choosing without consuming a spell slot, so you can actually upcast Bestial Form or something or whatever to 6th level and still be able to cast Lesser Regeneration. So this is kind of like if you want to save a spell slot. However, anything else will work. Club of Hill Giant Strength, Staff of the Ram, you could cast Shillelagh with that if you want to. Basically any sort of like high level bludgeoning weapon, I would recommend a club or a quarterstaff probably would get the best results, will work extremely well here. Otherwise, I did originally have the Flail of Ages as kind of the late game weapon, so you could use that as well, but that was again back when this was part Nature Cleric, so feel free to kind of change things up as you like, but I do like the Shattered Flail at least in the early game, and then any decent bludgeoning weapon, although the Staff of Spell Power is recommended for that spell slot saving, and I don't really recommend using the Marker Heshki or anything like that, because I think that is better reserved for the spellcaster in your team, so I think the Staff of Spell Power is a nice intermediary between the two. So yeah, Shattered Flail, and then something decent with bludgeoning damage in the late game. Next up for our equipment, we do have the Bone Spike Helmet. Again, if you decide to go with the weapon route, this is probably one of the best things you can get in Act 3, as even though we're not going to be raging, so we don't get any of this stuff, we do gain a +2 to Intimidation, which is always nice and does make sense for this build, as well as the ability to use Menacing Attack to potentially frighten our enemies as we attack them, and deal an extra bit of damage on top. So it is just going to make our weapon attacks a bit more powerful overall, and again, being able to inflict fear on a werewolf Halloween build, it does make sense to me, so I recommend picking this up later in the late game. However, a good early game option that works for any playstyle is going to be the Haste Helm, giving you momentum for 3 turns at the start of combat, giving you a big boost to your movement speed. This is going to allow you to, as soon as you see your prey, you immediately jump on them, being able to jump straight in and get a series of attacks off on them. So overall, I think this is just a great generic option for the early game. There are other Act 3 options if you decide not to go the weapon route and mainly stick to wild shape and unarmed strikes. There's things like the Shape Changer Hat for an extra wild shape charge once per long rest, and things like the Mask of Soul Perception to give you better initiative and such like that. So feel free to change this up, but I really did like the idea of having Menacing Attack if you do decide to go with the weapon route later on. For our cloak, we have the Cloak of Protection for a +1 to armor class and saving throws. +1 to armor class is going to help with our overall defenses, as well as the saving throws are going to help with our concentration saves. So overall, it's pretty much just a necessity for this build. Next up, for our armor or clothing, we're going to have the Graceful Cloth. We're going to gain Cat's Grace, which means you have advantage on dexterity checks, as well as increase our dexterity score by 2 to a maximum of 20. We also gain a +1 bonus to dexterity saving throws, and also increase our jump distance by 1.5 meters. Everything thematic that we could possibly want on this build is here. This allows us to have an 18 in dexterity without any ability score improvements, as well as making just our dexterity and our jumping distance again. It's augmenting our physical abilities. It just makes sense. You get this really early into the game as well, so you basically pick this up and you don't need to worry about any other armor pieces for the rest of the game. Next up, for our gloves, your final gloves that you'll pick up in Act 3 are the Hell Dust Gloves. Again, this gives us a +1 bonus to spell save attack rolls and spell save DC, which will come up very infrequently on this build. However, this works both for our unarmed strike and weapon attack stuff. Our weapon attacks will deal fire damage, which isn't exactly on theme, but hey, extra damage is extra damage. But this really works for the unarmed fighting style, where our unarmed attacks will deal 1 to 6 necrotic damage. Again, maybe you could flavor that as spreading the curse of the werewolf, like I said. But it can also possibly inflict bleeding. So now we're literally attacking with our claws and boring into our enemies, making them bleed, making it so they take 2 slashing damage at the start of each turn and have disadvantage on Constitution saving throws. So this is going to be great against spellcasters. This is also going to give you the Raise of Fire cantrip if you're in desperate need of a very, very unflavorful for this build. Unflavorful is not a word, but you get the point. At ranged attack, it does do a lot of damage, but otherwise I would avoid using it. But for some early game options, in Act 2 you can pick up the Flawed Helldust Gloves. It's called the Hellgloom Gloves here, just ignore it. This is basically just a slightly lesser version of the Helldust Gloves. It's basically like a damage die down, and it doesn't come with Raise of Fire, but hey, it gets you a slightly lesser version of the power that we want in Act 2, and this still inflicts the bleeding, which is nice. But in Act 1, the Braces of Defense will be great because it will give you a +2 bonus to your armor class. So overall, you could just make yourself more defensive or more offensive. Really up to you. And finally, we do have the Evasive Shoes here to give us a +1 bonus to our armor class to round out our AC to a nice even 20, which is going to be great for this build. Next up, for our amulet, you all saw this one coming. This is Khalid's Gift. This is going to give us that +1 to wisdom. That is going to really help us get our wisdom to where we want it. So now we have an 18 dex, 18 con, and 18 wisdom, which is a very solid stat spread to have. It also is going to give us the ability to cast Aid as a level 3 spell, just giving us an extra 10 hit points, which we're certainly not going to say no to. Next up, we do have the Ring of Regeneration to give us a more natural healing factor, an extra 1d4 hit points every turn. This means we can be healing up to 14 hit points every turn with lesser regeneration, which is really, really nice. Combining this with the Whispering Promise to give us Bless every time we heal ourselves is extremely nice, giving us a +1d4 bonus to attack rolls and saving throws for 2 turns every time we heal, which again is going to be every turn, so this will constantly be up. This is going to help us make attacks, and it's also going to help with our Constitution saving throws. So with our combination of everything that we have here, we're basically never going to be dropping concentration on our important things. Obviously, I will point this out quick, the Shapeshifter's Boon Ring does exist, giving you a +1d4 bonus to all checks while shapeshifted, but I don't really think it fits the build very well, but I thought I would mention it regardless. So yeah, that is the build, and overall, I'm really happy with how this one turned out. This was one of the ones where I was really struggling with the concept of it, of how to get the whole werewolf thing across without actually being able to transform into a werewolf in the more traditional pop culture sense. But with this, we get pretty much everything. We get the ability to transform into the wolf, we get the ability to augment our physical abilities and kind of become a semi-werewolf for things like Bestial Form and Guardian of Nature, and we just get a bunch of other flavorful options and some powerful utility and support options, and we are just an extremely tanky build. This is one of the tankiest builds I've made. Pretty much most wild shape builds are, and again, we didn't even have to use things like the Armour of Moonbasking for that temporary HP. We're still just extremely tanky overall, and we have a ton of different ways of dealing damage. Again though, wolves were best in packs. This is a build that, while it is extremely tanky, it is the tank of the party, just on its own. While it does have decent DPS and can eventually just outslug enemies for its sheer healing and tankiness, it does work best in a party that has people who can deal lots of damage. Pairing this with my Jekyll and Hyde and Frankenstein build would actually be extremely beneficial, because obviously the Frankenstein build can output massive amounts of damage but is a bit squishy at the end of the day, so having the wolf to tank the hits for it is actually really, really nice. And then Jekyll and Hyde is just lobbing potions from the back, lobbing grenades and shit, just dealing even more damage. So those three builds together are going to work really well, and in fact, if you wanted to, you can even spec this into being a bit more of a healer to keep the whole party up if you decide to. So overall, I'm quite happy with how this turned out. I feel like it was really hard to nail that werewolf concept, but I do think I got as close as I could here, with just a ton of options to really help out the build overall. And eventually, if the werewolf origin transformation mods from Nexus do make their way over to Mod Manager and eventually to consoles, then yeah, I would use that on this build, maybe change some stuff around a little bit, but overall that would work quite nicely. So yeah, I do think that is going to be it for me for this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.